Hello, class. In this lecture, we will discuss Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 through 24. And we titled this lecture, Paul Defends His Apostolic Authority. He was independent of the other apostles. So, look at verse 11. He writes, "For I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." The commentary on these verses. The Judaizers apparently claimed that Paul actually received his teachings from the apostles. Paul stated that he did not receive the gospel from any human source. Paul did not receive the gospel he preached by means of some course of instruction, that is, rabbinic Judaism normally practiced catechetical instruction. Instead, Paul received it directly through the revelation, that is, making truth known that was previously unknown, of Jesus Christ, and not through the apostles. Let's read verse 13 and 14. "For if you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure, and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." Paul's former conduct in Judaism, we see, he was a fanatic persecutor of the church. He tried to destroy the church. Paul was also zealous to advance as a Pharisee in Judaism. He felt driven to excel over other Jews. He loved the Mosaic law. He was zealous for the traditions of his fathers. Therefore, Paul's relationship with the church before his conversion establishes that he was well acquainted with the teachings of Judaism. There was nothing to prepare him for a positive response to the gospel, he argues. Then we see in verse 15 and 16 he writes, "But when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles." So let's see what Paul is saying here. God had set him apart from birth. God called Paul by his grace. Paul was pleased to reveal his Son through Paul. The purpose of this revelation was that Paul might preach Christ among the Gentiles. Therefore, Paul emphasized that both his conversion and his commission owed nothing to man, but came from God instead. So let's read 16b and 17. Paul continues. He said, "I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus." Though Paul met other Christians after his conversion, he did not consult with them on doctrine. Neither did he go to the apostles in Jerusalem to confer about doctrine. Instead, he went to Arabia to receive further revelation from God. Paul's point: he formed his theology not by consulting with other men, but independently as he sought God's guidance. Now verse 17 and 18. "Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus." That's a repeat, but it keeps the flow here. "Then 3 years later I went to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. So these are events that reinforce Paul's argument here. Paul asserts that he waited 3 years after his conversion to Christianity to go to Jerusalem. During this time, Paul was in Damascus and Arabia. Would Paul have waited that long? Had he needed theological instruction from the apostles? When did he go? When he did go, it was to get personally acquainted with Peter, a visit lasting only 15 days. Paul then left because of a plot against his life. We see in verse 19 and 20, Paul says, "But I did not see any other of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother, half-brother. Now, in what I am writing to you, I assure you before God that I am not lying." So we see events that reinforces Paul's argument continued here. While in Jerusalem, Paul did not see any of the other apostles except James, the half-brother of Jesus, who was a leader in the church in Jerusalem. Paul stressed the truth of what he had just stated by putting himself under an oath, calling God as his witness. There's no doubt, no doubt, was in the face of a false charge by his opponents that he had misrepresented his relationship to the apostles. Let's read verse 21. Then Paul says, I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. And so after Paul's abbreviated visit in Jerusalem, he worked for an extended time in Syria and Cilicia. This is why he was personally unknown to the churches of Judea. Paul was not commissioned for his ministry by the apostles, and because of the distance between him and Jerusalem, he could not have been under their authority or subject to their oversight. We see in verse 22, Paul writes, I was still unknown by sight to the churches of Judea which were in Christ. That is, I was unknown by sight. I wouldn't recognize. But only they kept hearing, they heard about him. He who once persecuted us is now preaching the faith which he once tried to destroy. And they were glorifying God because of Paul's conversion. The churches in Judea by this time had almost forgotten Paul. The only report they had recently heard was that Paul, who formerly persecuted the church, was now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. Paul's proclamation would include the doctrine of justification by faith apart from circumcision or works. In the face of this report, the Judean believers praised God because of Paul. This was a telling blow to the false teachers. The Jewish Christians in Judea rejoiced in the same gospel the Judaizers sought to undermine. And that concludes this section and this lecture. I would like to share with you my sources again. Donald Campbell, contribution to his commentary on Galatians in the Bible Knowledge Commentary. Also Timothy George in the New American Commentary on Galatians, and Arnold Fruchtenbaum's work, Faith Alone, the Condition of Salvation.